This presentation will cover issues related to sexual misconduct abroad. More specifically, coping with harassment and violence while abroad and options for seeking support for yourself, supporting a friend, and reporting. Before we begin, a few important notes. Sexual violence, including harassment, may be challenging to communicate about abroad, where cultural norms are often different than those in the U.S. However, cultural sensitivity does not mean that you need to submit to behaviors that invade your personal boundaries or make you feel unsafe or uncomfortable. It also does not give you license to push other people's boundaries. Most importantly, remember that sexual violence is never your fault. Sexual assault and rape are prevalent globally, and no one is immune. Students of any gender identity should exercise awareness and caution, as sexual harassment and assault can happen at any time or place. Educating yourself about sexual harassment, violence, and gender dynamics in your host country can empower you and your friends to make safer choices. What you consider sexual violence or harassment may not be seen in the same way in your host country. Research your host country's policies on sexual violence and assault before going abroad. Take the time to learn how the history of your host country's relations with the U.S. might be tied to sexual violence, and how that might influence perceptions of you and potential power dynamics. Remember that sexual violence isn't gender or race specific. It happens to and is perpetrated by all genders, races, ethnicities, and nationalities. In addition to your research, we encourage you to talk with your host family, your program returnees, and local students to better understand these cultural differences. Reflect on what you have learned in your research and what it means for your presence where you will be traveling. In this capacity, it is important to be an active bystander around sexual violence and harassment for your peers. If you see someone perpetuating sexual violence or harassment, do what you can to step up. But similarly, consider how your opposition to harassment is a personal choice that can be both empowering and/or dangerous. Value your own boundaries and the boundaries of others, and reflect on how communication around those boundaries may be challenging in different cultural contexts. The pyramid of violence depicts that violence is on a continuum where each level of the pyramid builds upon the previous. What do you notice here? What do you think this image is telling us? The pyramid can also help you to think about what it means to intervene and support someone who has experienced violence. Incorporating strategies such as bystander intervention empowers students of all genders to keep yourself and your friends safe while abroad. The goal of bystander intervention strategies is to change social norms so that everyone is looking out for one another, and to recognize that we each have a role to play in creating the environments we want. The 5 Ds focus on different options for intervention. As mentioned in the previous slide, if you see someone perpetuating sexual violence or harassment, do what you can to step up. But similarly, consider how your opposition to harassment is a personal choice that can be both empowering and/or dangerous. Northwestern is committed to fostering an environment in which all members of our community are free from discrimination and harassment, including sexual misconduct. The Office of Equity works to uphold the university's commitment by responding to reports of discrimination and harassment, including by helping students, faculty, and staff understand the university's processes for making such reports, providing support and resources to those impacted by discrimination and harassment, including sexual misconduct, providing training, consultation, and resources to the university community regarding accommodating of individuals with disabilities, the university's affirmative action programs for faculty and staff, and responding to reports of discrimination and harassment, and working with students, faculty, and staff to revise and implement policies related to discrimination, harassment, and sexual misconduct, and providing reasonable accommodations to individuals with disabilities. It is important to remember that Northwestern's policy on sexual misconduct is designed to help you even while abroad. Let's briefly talk about each of these terms and how they relate to your time abroad. Sexual assault is sexual penetration without consent, sexual contact without consent, or statutory rape. Sexual exploitation is taking sexual advantage of another person or violating the sexual privacy of another without consent. For example, voyeurism, indecent exposure, or recording intimate activity. Sexual harassment is unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature that creates a hostile environment or is a condition of employment, academic standing, or participation in a university program or activity. Dating and domestic violence is any violence between two people who are or have been in a romantic or intimate relationship. And stalking is knowingly engaging in a course of conduct directed at a specific person that one knows or should know would cause a reasonable person to fear for their safety or suffer substantial emotional distress. For example, threats, following, monitoring, or communication. When supporting survivors and processing your own survivorship, it is pivotal that you think about how this looks while abroad. How the first disclosure is received is vital to the ability for a survivor to process their own survivorship. Listening is very important. This means being patient, allowing a survivor to guide the conversation, avoiding labeling their experience, and staying empathetic. Also, don't try to play investigator. It is not important for you to know details. Just be patient and know that silence is okay. Supporting is another way to help survivors. To support a survivor, it is important to address any self-blame they have by validating their experiences. Additionally, be transparent and discuss their strengths, like resilience. Do not make excuses for or defend the perpetrator. Also, please let survivors take the lead on whether or not they want to report their experience to the university or to law enforcement. Lastly, connect. Know what resources are available to you as well as someone you are helping while abroad. Consider this student quote. Please reflect on this based on information covered in the previous slides. If you are a survivor of sexual misconduct that occurred abroad, what happened to you was not your fault. Experiencing as well as processing sexual misconduct is difficult. It can even be more confusing and complicated if it occurs in another country or culture. Survivors often experience a range of emotions, including fear, anxiety, and confusion. There is no one way to respond. Whatever feels like the right response to you is normal. Determining what steps to take after a traumatic experience can be difficult, especially when you are far from home. The options outlined on the next slides are just that, options. Not all survivors of sexual misconduct need or seek immediate medical attention or are interested in reporting. Some survivors choose to finish their overseas experience while others feel their recovery will be hastened by returning home. If your immediate safety is being threatened, please consider calling your designated local emergency contact or the University Police's 24/7 International Emergency Assistance Line at 847-491-3456. A trusted individual on site, such as a resident or faculty director, will often have received training on responding to a disclosure of sexual misconduct. These individuals are in the best position to provide immediate assistance, such as identifying and helping to secure access to appropriate quality medical care in partnership with Northwestern's international insurance and assistance provider, GeoBlue. A safety plan, particularly in cases of relationship violence and stalking, can also be an important step towards safety. A safety plan is a personalized, practical plan that includes ways to remain safe while in a relationship, planning to leave, or after you leave. Medical attention can be made available for survivors of sexual and relationship violence. This attention can be for physical, emotional, and sexual health needs, as well as to complete a forensic exam. Access to a forensic exam will vary depending on local resources. Be aware, though, that some countries will require the attending physician to alert the police. However, this varies by country. You may receive a physical exam and avoid legal involvement by not disclosing the sexual assault to the medical professionals if you do not want to report the assault to the police. Additionally, in some countries such as Qatar, it's illegal to have sex out of wedlock. This means that the survivor could potentially be charged with a crime if they report sexual assault to the authorities. Prior to your study abroad experience, research the laws of your host country or any other countries you plan to travel to, and talk to your on-site program staff to understand your rights. You may choose to disclose an experience of sexual misconduct to a variety of individuals in the U.S. or abroad in order to receive support services. Some individuals are able to offer legally protected confidentiality, while others can offer privacy and discretion but are required to report the incident. We'll now outline reporting options, resources, and support available through Northwestern. Northwestern employees that support students abroad receive training on how to respond to a disclosure of sexual misconduct. These contacts can provide support and connections with resources as needed. However, under the Policy on Sexual Misconduct, all Northwestern employees are obligated to report sexual misconduct abroad that they observe or are told about to the Title IX Coordinator or Deputy Title IX Coordinator for Students in the Office of Equity. This means that disclosures made to Evanston staff, including academic advisors, study abroad advisors, Northwestern faculty, as well as on-site staff, including resident directors, partner university faculty, and other on-site staff, will be reported to the Office of Equity. Northwestern handles sexual misconduct reports discreetly, with information shared only with those who need to know in order to investigate or resolve the matter. In cases where a person who may have experienced sexual misconduct does not wish to proceed with an investigation, Northwestern is typically able to honor that request. If you choose to disclose to a responsible employee, they will do their best to explain their reporting responsibilities before you disclose to them, explain that though they are not confidential, they will keep the information private, inform you that if you choose to disclose, they will need to report it to the Office of Equity and that you will be contacted by the Office of Equity, and offer to make an appointment with a confidential resource if appropriate. If you wish to report to the Office of Equity yourself, you may complete the Sexual Misconduct Reporting Form seen here. After the Office of Equity receives the report, you will receive an outreach email containing information about resources and options and an invitation to meet. You then decide whether or not you want to respond. You are not obligated to meet with an Office of Equity staff member. Making a report to the Office of Equity does not mean that your parents will be informed. It also does not mean that you are initiating an investigation or making a report to NUPD, Evanston PD, or other law enforcement. Confidential resources will not disclose information about incidents of sexual misconduct to anyone, including law enforcement or the university. Telephone or Skype conversations with confidential Northwestern employees can be arranged to occur outside of regular business hours and in a time zone that is convenient for the survivor. On-campus Northwestern confidential reporting options are the Center for Awareness, Response, and Education, CAPS, and Religious and Spiritual Life. Please note that while CAPS is not available to provide counseling to students over the phone, they can work with students once they have returned to campus. Off-campus confidential reporting options are outlined here. To recap, students of any gender identity should exercise awareness and caution as sexual harassment and assault can happen at any time or place. Research cultural norms in your host country, including gender norms and whether it would be safe to report sexual violence. Understand your reporting options, including responsible employees and confidential resources. And know that sexual violence is never your fault.